Good evening all. I'm Tab Binding and I'm your Programme Manager, and this is week 4 of the webinar series that runs alongside the Riverside Sunderland University Design Challenge, which we're bringing to you with MOBIE and Sunderland City Council. So tonight is procurement, costing and placemaking. Tomorrow we have future homes, and then on Friday we have our virtual pub. So this competition is based in Sunderland, and this is the site of the homes that you will be designing. And we're asking you to do an indicative master plan for 100 homes, but one 3-bed family home in detail on a 9-metre by 6-metre footprint. I work for TRADA and the Timber Trade Federation, and if you haven't yet signed up for free student access, don't go here. Head to the academic page, sign up in the big orange box, and you'll get 63 units and 8 modules all about timber, an infinite number of whiz sheets, 100+ case studies, and books online. Timber frame, offsite, cross-laminated timber, structural timber elements, and designing timber structures. And our team for tonight to talk about procurement, costing, and placemaking are Kelly, Ollie, Alex, Rob, Danny, and Gemma. And with that, I'd like to hand over tonight's chair, Kelly Harrison, who is also sits on the TRADA board.
Hi, thanks Tabitha. Hello everybody. I'm actually not in placemaking or procurement, but a structural engineer, and last night we had a really good evening on structures. So I thought I'd just start us off today to talk about collaboration and how we all work together as a team, and how some examples of how in the past we've worked successfully with QSs and with contractors QSs to look at projects on a whole, look at timber projects and save money on the whole scheme, and then perhaps finish on with some ways that you might look at this project, and as a structural engineer what questions I would be asking the QS if we were. And so I'll just start sharing. Hopefully, is that working? Okay, thanks Tabitha. Okay, so just a little title slide here. This is our competition, so it's very exciting. I am also, as well as a board member on TRADA, I'm also an associate director at Whitby Wood. And I'll just show you now a couple of projects where we've looked into a few of these studies. So this is the boiler house. It's been built now for a few years, but it's a project where the design at the start was for a concrete framed residential built multi-story residential building, and what we had a look at was changing that concrete to a CLT frame. The concrete frame was originally on a series of piles in the ground as well, on piled foundations. I mean, this was a few years ago now when we were allowed to put timber in the facade of the building, so we'd have a slightly different model now with different exterior walls, but you can see it was a very lightweight construction, and I just wanted to show you a quick study we did. So comparing to the original design, which had all of these piles under the concrete structure, we managed to make it light enough to allow it all to sit on a podium, which then sat on a raft slab. And so the original design had 967 meters cubed of concrete, and we managed to reduce that on a 600 millimeter raft slab to only 485 meters cubed. I'm not going to quote costs here. I think that's probably to the QSs on this evening, but this is the type of information we would give to the QS. So it also, in addition to saving all that concrete, which has a huge carbon benefit as well, It also avoided a lot of risk in the contractor's price. So that's another thing to have a think about. This site had a history of lots of buildings on it before, and there were lots of obstructions in the ground or potential obstructions. And because the contractor knew that when they were pricing the scheme, they would add in lots of risk in case their piling rig hit something, and then it's really expensive for a piling rig to be sat on site doing nothing while I try and deal with the obstruction in the ground. So a lot of risk money came out of the price, and a lot of concrete money came out of the price as well. So it's just something you can think about in terms of lightweight structures and lightweight construction. A lot of the time when we're looking at projects like this, you know, no QSs on tonight's panel, but others may just look at it and think, oh, CLT, and it's really expensive, because per meter cubed it would be quite expensive. But when you compare it as a whole project with savings that you get, such as these, it actually quite often comes out very similar in price. And so as QSs, I think you have to think of the project as a whole. That's been my experience. This is something else we did very, very early stages of a project, where we were looking at lots of different options. So not only were we comparing the carbon benefit of various construction techniques, but also the costs. We had a friendly QS help us, and this was actually a project in Europe, so it's all in euros. But we were able to look at, you know, what we thought the structure, the costs were for the structure, and also the CO2, and then that could make a really strong argument to the client. I think another thing that you could add to this is the value, because sometimes it could also be much more valuable asset to have a sustainable construction technique, especially with changing policies and targets that we all have to hit. Here I've just given you a few examples. This is what you should be thinking about asking your structural engineers for options. You know, this is where we were looking on the left. We were looking at a hybrid construction. Did a study on different beam depths, and then looked at the difference in carbon, and then the steel tonnage for the floor as well. And that steel tonnage was then given to the QS to work out the price for the steel for the floor. We also looked at different options for timber floors as well, and again looked at the carbon of that. And I think you should be really looking to your structural engineers to think about these different options and ways of doing things to get the price and the carbon down, because it often goes hand in hand. I just put a few images from good old Google up of different ways that you might see your detailed residential building being built. And these are some pros and cons that we put together for the QS&R project to have a think about, and from a structural point of view, in terms of how quick they are to build, if you know what type of contractors are going to build them, if they're local, if you know the trade is very commonly used in the area. So here we've got a masonry solution with prefabricated timber roof joists and floor joists. This is very standard approach. Most local contractors can do it, and does that mean it's cheaper? I'm not sure. Is it slower because bricks are quite slow and blocks are quite slow compared to some of the other examples? So we have to think about these things as well as with the QS to come up with the right solution. So another one is timber frame construction. It's a bit less common than your masonry, but also done quite a lot. It's really easy to insulate, and if we're thinking about sort of passive house type construction here, then it's something that we should be considering. Low embodied carbon as well. There's then other products on the market as well, SIPs. So these insulated panels. where we have OSB either side with insulation, and these are load bearing, so they can be our structure as well, but they're only done by certain manufacturers. And so maybe your pool of people who can build this type of thing is a lot smaller, reducing competition. It's really lightweight though, and then can sit on very light foundations. And then we have CLT, which is cross-laminated timber, which may produce a beautiful interior. It may also be very quick to erect, but it's quite thick, and then rather than having the insulation within the wall as it is here, or it might be with the timber studs, it will be in addition to the wall, so you get quite thick walls. And it may be that if on mass, it may be a very economical way of doing it, but if it was a singular house or one-offs, it may be quite expensive way of doing it. So these are the sort of pros and cons and things that we think about structural engineers and bring up to talk to our team, the architects and the QS, and come up with the best solution. So that's just a really quick intro from me, and I think we'll then go on to our speakers, if that's okay. Ollie, I think, are you next?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think you've absolutely nailed it there and set the scene perfectly, to be honest with you, in terms of what we're looking at. So good evening, everybody. My name's Oliver Booth. I'm a partner at G&T in the cost management division, but also a very proud member of the TRADA advisory committee, which I sit on with many of the guys on the call tonight. So I've been tasked with talking to you guys about procuring engineered timber buildings. So there's quite a few slides here, but I'm going to rattle through quite quickly. First of all, this is a slightly old graph now, but just setting the scene, which I'm sure we're all acutely aware that the problem of what we face is one of availability and affordability, and in terms of housing. And you know, we seem to have got worse and worse at providing this over the last 50 plus years. So it's a serious issue, and there's obviously lots of ways that we can deal with that. We can build taller. The councils can inject lots of money into the councils to try and do it, sort the problem out again. We can try and unlock land. We could potentially go to the greenbelt. We could stop people sitting on land and not developing it. Invest more in infrastructure and reach other parts of the UK. More resources to planning authorities so we can push things through more quickly. Stop NIMBYism, not in my backyard approach to building. Prevent the house builders, those who shall not be named, that are perhaps restricting supply to drive up demand and get better values. Maybe we should be looking at refurbishing and extending stock. And then the kind of the things we're talking about really today is how we perhaps could procure smarter and adopt modern methods of construction with a view to using timber. So again, in terms of kind of food and beverages and certainly the automobile industry and even caravans really, which is a step towards housing, these industries have been there for a hell of a long time. And yet, as Kelly touched on a little bit earlier, we're still, physically using our hands brick by brick to build our houses, which is slow and it's perhaps ad hoc and could be done in a better way. So, just this slide is just to try and illustrate the idea that, this is, 30 to 50 subcontract packages in a typical residential project. But by adopting MMC, we can potentially take out some of those subcontract packages and actually use it in a way that we adopt it by going offsite. And so that really means that we have to have a different approach to estimating, and ourselves and Cast, who are on the call as well, we've had to kind of rethink about how we cost our buildings, and it's not been easy, and some are better at it than others in terms of organisations have embraced it, and some haven't. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of Latin. I don't know if there's any Latin scholars on the call, but basically the motto of the RICS is est modus in rebus, and there is measure in all things, which I think is quite a positive way of looking at things. It's the way I read that is that, there's nothing we shouldn't be able to cost really. And I think that's the approach we should take. And a big part of that is collaboration. So as QSs, we're very used to costing, reinforced concrete frames, which is essentially mass concrete, rebar. We get told the weights by Kelly and her guys and essentially price it on that basis, and then formwork. And that's been around for a long time. We've got lots of benchmark data. It's very, very easy for us. Structural steel, it tends to be measured on a tonnage basis. Again, Kelly will tell us what kind of beams we should be using, and we will apply a rate for that. and load-bearing brickwork. Again, it's been around for a hell of a long time, and we're very accustomed to costing it and have lots of benchmark data. But we're in a relatively brave new world. I say that because obviously some of this stuff's been around a hell of a long time. And as Kelly's touched on, you know, SIPs, structural infill panels, you know, the likes of Barratt Homes have been using this for many, many years. It's fast, it's lightweight, it's sustainable timber construction, glulam beams and columns. There's different species of wood. You know, typically we might be talking about pine or spruce because they're perhaps the cheaper of the timber materials, but it may be that we could look at other materials as well in terms of, you know, larch or beech and things like that. And that's another question for you guys to get you guys thinking. Cross-laminated timber, some of the examples Kelly showed earlier, laminated veneer lumber, and then hybrid. You know, don't just force a square into a circle or vice versa. You know, sometimes it's about, you know, working with materials and to best fit the actual solution and the design and the site. So this different approach means that we have to look at different things in a different way. So, you know, we have to look at engaging with the supply chain earlier, which, because we live in quite a confrontational industry still, that doesn't happen early enough. We need to look at different procurement strategies. We need to understand that if this stuff is coming off-site to on-site, what are the transport restrictions? You know, as Kelly touched on earlier, lighter structure should mean lighter foundations. We need to work hand in glove with the engineers to try and do a comparison. We need to look at economic design principles, because off-site construction has different design principles, which again often are driven by the fact that this is brought on the back of a truck to our sites, and there are restrictions in that. Benchmark data that's available, it's growing. Cast are doing loads of work on this. We're doing lots of work as well. And look at program savings, because it should be faster as well. So there's loads of things in there just to think about when you approaching the task that you've got in hand. I put this in here because again, we need to just think about the materials we're using. So in terms of mass timber, whether it's CLT or it's glulam, this is very approximately how the actual cost breaks down. So about 50% is in actually the raw material itself. When you go over to Storenzo and Binderholz, they actually say to you, we'd like to sell you, you know, just the right amount of timber. We don't want to over specify it. We don't want to, you know, to sell you too much, because let's face it, it is a natural product, and we want to use it for many, many years to come, and not cut down trees unreasonably. So 50% is actually in the raw material we were using, and then perhaps another 20% is in the manufacture. So, you know, 75% of the cost is actually in that manufacture and that raw material that takes place predominantly in Europe, although, you know, it may well be coming to the UK very, very soon. I'll say no more on that. But the fact of the matter is that, you know, it doesn't matter where this is going in the UK, cost-wise, it does tend to be very, very similar in terms of the raw material and the off-site manufacture. So that's maybe something you might want to have a think about. Again, I touched on it earlier, all these, you know, different solutions we have, and again, mixing and matching hybrid. Don't just force a timber solution. We'd love you to. That's what we're all trying to aspire to here. But it may be you want to combine some of these. So, you know, maybe that we look at light gauge steel or precast concrete or twin wall construction, the use of toilet pods and kitchen pods, and modular prefabricated boxes. And here's just some examples of that. And a really good slide by AKT2, which just kind of shows all the different types and how they might all fit in. So I would pinch this because I think it categorizes it quite well. Also think about, in terms of what you're doing, is a panelized solution better, essentially 2D construction better for what you're trying to do? Or are you going to adopt something that's perhaps more three-dimensional? Kelly touched on this earlier. Be very careful about putting any timber, because it is unfortunately categorized as a combustible in your buildings, albeit at the moment that's only for buildings over 18. It's probably going to 11 meters. So the heights that you've been given, you could probably do it, but there's a danger that you might expose your client to future changes in building regulations. RHE Studio put this together. I think this is fantastic. Just showcases how, you know, the house is a kit of parts. You know, CLT, glulam looks incredible, and is, you know, great for the industry. And again, just thinking about space layouts and, you know, lots of principles that are good house building principles that sometimes get lost, which is, you know, stacking, you know, spans, what makes your building more efficient. Let's go back to the, you know, the automobile industry in terms of repetition, and in terms of standardizing things, because that will savings will fall out. Now, some more extravagant examples. These aren't houses, but again, just the use of glue lambs, CLTs, rib slabs. There really is a plethora of different technologies available today. So, really go out there and do your homework. This one's, an expensive house, so I'm not expecting to see many of these, but, precast concrete cores, LVL and CLT. In terms of supply chain and procurement, it'd be great to get you guys thinking and seeing your submissions. How are you going to deliver it? Are you going to use a traditional main contractor on a D&B basis, or are you thinking perhaps more a construction management route? Therefore, going into direct contract packages with subcontractors, suppliers, etc. So it'd be really good to see what your thoughts are on this. And these are all examples of people in the timber industry. Be great to get you thinking about program. As Kelly touched on as well, often as a QS, we haven't got the program available. We haven't got the comparison. How are your houses, if they are more offsite, going to be built quicker? How are you going to deliver? The client's return on investment will be better. They might want to put some narrative to that and have a think. Speed of install, program benefits, lighter structure, prefabrication, things like lack of patching. This might be a narrative in terms of how you're going to do your submissions, but we really want to see you thinking. It is sustainable. We need to be thinking about embodied carbon. We need to also be thinking about life cycle costing in what you're doing and what you're choosing. Personally, I've got a bit of a bugbear, as I know many have, that sequestered carbon doesn't seem to be recognised enough at the moment. But maybe you might want to write something on that. I've touched on London there. I appreciate we're not working in London, but have a think about location as well and how what you're choosing will fit into that location in terms of cost. And what's most flexible as well. Again, just themes, cost, procurement. Can the UK manufacture again? Quality homes. Perhaps quality homes cost more initially, but the lower life cycle costs, better quality of living for the people living in them. Job creation, in terms of using stuff that's built in factories that could be 24/7, that all sorts of people can use in and be trained in. Good architecture, think about transportation and potentially capacity in the industry as well. And kind of going back to that original slide, that one at the beginning, how do we fix affordability and availability? Well, how do we meet critical demand? Well, this, offsite manufacture is a way, and timber has a massive role to play in that. Time is money. This stuff should be installed and put together faster. Reduced risks because you're faster to site. You can manage the process in a factory environment. Which is quality controlled. It's potentially safer because it's done in that controlled atmosphere. Kickstart the UK economy post a Brexit era. Technology advancement, BIM. Again, it might be just a bit of narrative in your submission, but that might be something you want to touch on. Sustainable homes, getting to net zero. And let's face it, as a natural material, I don't think there's anything better out there than using timber products. So that should be a big part of it. Wellness for the end users as well. And then I just thought I'd end finally on just things that we might be thinking of as a collective of judges for the task that you've got at hand. So what drives your procurement and tendering route? Think about, is it cost certainty to the client? Is it cost competition? Do they want to compete, want to put lots of people against each other? Or are they more, would they prefer to negotiate and just get it right with somebody? Is it time and overall program? Is that less of an issue? Is that time pre-contract, post-contract, quality, transfer of risk? Does the client just want a lump sum price, or are they willing to take some of the risk and some of the benefits potentially if it's well managed? Market conditions, we're in a brave new world. I don't know what's going to pan out, but you guys might have views on that, and that might help shape what you're going to do. Flexibility, use of offsite manufacturing materials as much as possible in your designs, and other things as well. And in terms of costs and metrics, these are things that hopefully on your QS courses you're talking about. Gross internal floor areas, do everything in cost per square meter and convert it to cost per square foot. That's what clients like to see. Net internal areas, net to gross efficiencies, wall to floor ratios, all the stuff good stuff you've been learning. So try and get this all in your summary page if you can, just to impress the actual judges. What are your assumptions and exclusions? What have you considered and included, and what have you excluded? Think about program. If you could put a program in, that'd be magnificent. Even if it's wildly out, it would just be great to see everybody kind of applying themselves and thinking about how long it would take to deliver this. And also just think about how you're going to lay out your cost plan. And I'm sure the guy's going to talk about that more later on. But how are you going to put it all in a sheet and some backing sheets for your client to go through and understand what you've allowed for, and just some useful tips and references. NRM, SPONS for costing if you can get hold of it, BCIS if you have access to the RSCS, facility. Market testing, ring people up and see if they'll give you a quote for stuff. I found people in the industry to be very giving with their time and advice. And don't forget your scale ruler, really. And that was it for me. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ollie. That was great. Thank you. For everybody, to remind you that you can post any questions in the chat. We'll pick them up as we go and maybe collect them a few at the end as well for a bit of a Q&A session. So yeah, I think Alex Abbey from Cullinan Studios is going to give us a talk next. Are you there, Alex? Hi, here we go. Alex, I'm not sure. I think you might be on mute. There we go. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Right. Potential hitch at the beginning. Right. Start show. Can you all see that? Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great, Ollie and Kelly. That's spot on what you've talked about. I think I'll probably be doubling up on quite a lot of it, but I'll just whiz through this. I think the first thing to say is what a fantastic site. It's incredible on this escarpment here. So I look forward to seeing some really exciting proposals coming out of this. Context. So my talk, I'm going to talk about the sort of climate emergency and a book I helped produce with TRADA, which was about how to procure engineered timber buildings. And I've used the headings of that to sort of structure this talk. So the first element is the context to say that, buildings and construction account for nearly 40% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. But timber, hopefully, will be the solution to get us to net zero. And this is in the context of, as architects, we've signed up to Architects Declare. And the RIBA has also a 2030 climate challenge, which is about energy targets primarily, and but also embodied carbon, and that's where timber particularly comes in. And the LETI guide, which is the London Energy Transformation Initiative, has produced excellent guidance of how we can get to net zero. And I recommend you look at their documents. They're available online in the LETI. And they've done a supplementary primer on embodied carbon here. And at the moment, TRADA and LETI are beginning a conversation about how we can get to a sort of agreed benchmark for measuring carbon in timber, because the other industries, concrete and steel, are all fighting back and making it look like they're just as good as timber, but we don't believe it is. So I am a partner at Cullinan Studio, an architect's practice based in London. And I also sit on the board of the advisory committee for TRADA. And we are committed to re-establishing the natural world in our built environment, whether it's how we connect to nature, how we build for a circular economy, or produce healthy buildings for communities. And every project we work on now is seen within that context. So this is the book I was mentioning at the beginning, and it's a kind of one-stop shop summary guide for a client should they wish to consider building a timber building. And it sets out the pitfalls, the pros and the cons in quite a good concise document, and that's available from the TRADA website. It's also worth just reminding ourselves, you know, where does timber come from? And I always love this cartoon from the Richard Scarry books, but it's a renewable resource locking in carbon and has a myriad ways of being milled and finished to produce anything from structural timbers through to fine furniture. A wonderful resource. I also thought it was worth saying that just up the road in Newcastle is what purports to be the largest timber structure in Europe, which is the Dunstan Staithes. And this was also on your site, and it was for dropping the coal into the boats and the smaller ones there. But I think the judges will inevitably be looking for something which picks up the industrial past of Sunderland. And, you know, there's some excellent examples of timber structures there from history. And also, I mean, the history of timber building, I mean, timber is, if properly detailed, can last upwards of 1,000 years. These are the stayed churches in Scandinavia, Norway, load-bearing timber, very simple but beautiful. And we're familiar with the buildings in the UK, half-timbered Elizabethan houses. The hammer beam, this is the largest hammer beam at Westminster in the world at the time, and it was developing timber to see how you could span greater and greater distances. And people like Wren and Inigo Jones took cues from the Renaissance architects and developed improved ways of spanning greater distances. So, for instance, the bottom right is the Sheldonian Theatre in Oxford. But looking at how you can take simple pieces of timber and scarf them together to get better spans and improving the structure there. And then you get to the big spans like these airship hangars here. So I'm going to try and also give you examples of projects that we've worked on in our practice, which are good lessons or examples of similar systems. So this is the grid shell we built at the Weald and Daniel Museum, which was using very small pieces of oak, finger jointed together like spaghetti, over 50 feet long, and then you basket weaved it together and dropped the scaffold to create a building. I'm not saying this is what you should do for your house, but it's showing you the possibilities of timber. And a very successful free span space with minimal use of timber. Cost and value, I won't dwell on this too much because I think that Ollie has already talked about this, and Danny and Rob will come on to this later, but this was in the book and it was a study looking at comparison between concrete and CLT. And even though the costs at the end were broadly similar, you get a much faster build, which has savings, of course, against that, which aren't shown in this figure. The benefits of timber, I think we've all seen, which are it's lightweight, durable, if properly detailed, sustainable. The value derived from it is that you get accuracy. It can be load bearing. It's very easy to fix to rather than plasterboard, which can be a nightmare with patching. It can be allow minimal thicknesses against other structural systems, which you can over several stories get more floors for the same height of building. Energy saving, self-finishing if you expose it. Obviously visual grade timber is more expensive, but it has other benefits which I'll come on to. And off-site manufacturers, you know, you can, one of the big issues is it's absolutely leads to much safer sites, which is often overlooked, in that if you're producing things in factory conditions, they are safe they're in the dry, they're well lit, there's systems set up for production lines, so it dramatically reduces the potential for injuries on site. So, I mean, there's issues as well. One of the cons at the moment is fire and insurance and water, but they can be overcome, and TRADA is working hard on these to with the Structural Timber Association and the industry to come up with a suitable response to sort of knee-jerk reaction to we can't have timber in buildings because it burns, which is unfortunate. And speed. So here's an example of one of our projects, which was a SIPS panel school, which we designed as a kit to go anywhere in the country, but ideally to fit into a street facade. And it was a repeating module of classrooms and toilets. And we worked with a SIPS manufacturer, Stuart Milne, to develop this prior to having any site, and we actually were able to test it on a site in Swindon, and it was really fast. It went up in less than 5 weeks, and the whole building was watertight in 7, and that was a huge improvement if we built it through using traditional methods. And I mean, although that was mainly SIPS, but this is the recent Sterling Prize winner in Norwich by Michael Riches, which is, although brick, is a timber frame project. And passive house, and that is an example of how you can produce really the highest quality housing in timber. So here's a building which looks at, if you understand the material, you can make it work for you. And this is what we did at the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh, where we understood how to use the LVL, designing a staircase which could be cut from standard sheets, again modular, to produce a feature stair out of LVL, which was stacked and carved. So structural timber used as a piece of furniture in a sense. And this is a hybrid building as well, so it's very thin steel columns to get that sense of lightness, and then with heavyweight timber beams floating over the top. There's increasing knowledge within the industry of how to use timber, although it's more, what we found is it's prevalent among certain contractors, and they like to use it once they have, but some are afraid to, and you have to convince. But this is a building we did at the University of Warwick, the largest timber roof in Europe at the time. And that was working with Arabs, and it's for Jaguar Land Rover, who are car manufacturers, but they wanted this unifying timber roof for the benefit of the users in the building and the quality that gave them. Supply, you need to think about supply. I mean, you're right on the docks at Sunderland, so could you create a nice set of drawings about how you could bring things on ships and get them to site? But a lot of engineered timber tends to cut, CLT particularly, and LVL comes from Europe. Or could you helicopter in it? Planning is a big issue for us as well, and we worked. They're very keen to have building sites which are very simple to build and mitigate noise and disruption to the locals. So this is an example of a project exactly like that at the Royal Horticultural Society in Hyde Hall, Essex. and we designed them a learning centre, and it had to be quick, light touch, so it didn't damage the plants, and timber was the optimal solution for that. And it was all brought in very small number of loads and built very quickly. Durability you have to think about, which I touched on at the very beginning, those 1,000-year-old churches. This is a walkway we've been doing, and it has to sit in a forest, and once it's up, it's up. So to get in there and maintain it is much harder, so it has to be very durable, but it's a timber. You have these little timber pods for learning areas, and that's all made of Akoya, which is a treated timber, with a chemically treated timber so it can last outside. So you have to think about that, what you're going to clad your buildings in. If you do use timber, you could consider that. There are other methods like charring it or coating it. That's the one of the learning pods. And then you know, some estate agents will actually market a building, a house, with the cachet that it's made of timber. This is an extension we did for a very expensive house in Hampstead, all timber throughout with fitted furniture. And this is a CLT house we did in the green belt, but internally all made of CLT, and you use the CLT to make your stairs and your furniture, and it's just absolutely lovely to be in, very warm and welcoming. So yes, think about how the home is, you know, where you get light in, how can you make it feel like a home. And finally, sustainability and wellness. And this is BREEAM 2018. You've got these various criteria you have to hit. This is another diagram from the Letty guide, showing how we should be designing for disassembly. So it looks at how you get the timber, process it, build it, operate it, demolish it, and then repurpose it. And we need to think to do that. We need to be doing that now for hitting net zero. There's a wealth and a growing body of studies which have proven the health benefits of timber buildings in terms of their stress reduction and helping the immune system function better, and productivity. And this was a study done in an office where they built a little timber area of the office and left an area of the office as normal, and it was a marked improvement in terms of well-being, feeling productive, and how they, you know, just generally enjoyed the place they were in. And that's why we've been working on this project for a park and health buildings for the NHS in Liverpool, Alderhay Children's Hospital. Why we selected timber for it, to encourage homeliness for the children with mental health issues who are using these buildings, and to make give them, even though it's an NHS building, make it to feel less of a institution, and encourage health outcomes, quicker recovery times, all around a garden with views and light, and places to sit. So that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That's great. I'd like to just, there's a couple of questions before we go into the next talk. I think there's one here that's probably for you, Alex. So maybe we just do that one quickly before we move on.
Sure.
So James has asked, which material will be better in lasting for a long period of time, thinking more than 70 years to 140 years. I feel that brick can outlast timber. If so, will it not be better to create strong, rigid ground floor out of brick and then use timber to create panels that can be built on top? and recycled when they reach their lifespan. I don't know, you touched on durability in your talk. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
Is that cladding specifically?
Oh, I'm not sure. James, can you let us know?
Because I mean, cladding, timber cladding, if well detailed with a nice overhanging roof, and can last easily 60, 70 years. You may have to replace the odd board here and there, and that's another beauty of it. It's very replaceable, easy to replace. Whereas the main structure of a building can last centuries if it's kept dry and free from rot and woodworm and all those sort of things, and fire. So I don't think there's a limit to it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers, James. Let us know in the chat if there's any further questions on it. I think another question leads us really well onto Danny and Rob's talk next, from JM. Is offsite manufacture, if offsite manufacture has so many positives, why doesn't everyone do it? So maybe you might be talking about that, I imagine, in your talk next, Danny and Rob. So I'll let you carry on.
This is one of those questions that has it could be a whole 3 hours in itself, Kelly, I tell you. Yeah, we'll touch on it, no doubt.
Okay, I'll just share my screen.
So while Danny is just getting the screen ready, Ollie earlier gave us a really good overview of procurement timber buildings. Our focus for the next 15-20 minutes or so is perhaps a little bit more granular in terms of some of the detail. I'm aware that in your groups that as part of your submission, there's a lot of thought that's got to go into the detail of costing of at least one house or apartment, depending on what your design reflects. And some of you may or may not have QSs in your team. So important for us just to give you a bit of an overview of how you might go about thinking about that, and give you a little bit more of a flavour of some of the detail that might sit behind it, just to build on some of the discussion that Ollie gave earlier. You got
Check on a flip. See that? Can you see the screen?
No.
Not yet, Danny.
No, I did share. Okay, here we go. Is that?
Yeah,
There we go.
Thank you.
yeah, good stuff. So just in terms of cast, we're relatively young in comparison to some of the others on the call. We started about 5 years ago, and we're solely focused on residential cost and project management in London and the UK. Some of you may be aware of the Farmer Review, which was entitled "Modernise or Die," that was released in 2016, which covered a review of the construction industry's labour market model. So as many as some of the pitfalls of the housing sector in the UK, which Ollie touched on earlier today, is very relevant. One of the major issues that we face in the future is that there's more people leaving the industry than coming into it. So to play to one part of the response to the question earlier is I think more and more people will start to adopt modern methods, because quite frankly they are going to have to, because there won't necessarily be the labour in the industry to actually deliver schemes of this sort of nature in the future. So it's something that we focus very, very passionately about at CAST, and something we'll come on to talk about over the course of the next 15 minutes or so. Slide down.
Yeah, sorry, just okay.
There we go. So for those of you who sort of aren't perhaps as close to some of the quantity surveying or cost management, I hate that term, quantity surveying, sorry, it's a very outdated term, cost management, in some of your courses, just thought I might give a quick overview of actually what it is we do, because some people understand and perhaps some people are less familiar. And actually, depending on what side of the fence you work for, your role can be very, very different. So for Gardiner THEOBALD, for CAST, for others like that, we work in consultancy environment. So much of our role is from very, very early stages in project, from inception, but we can also be involved all the way up to completion. Often very often pre-design teams, at sort of possibly even site acquisition stage, we're advising clients on how to build up budgets, how to generate build costs that might sit into site appraisals, using benchmark comparators to give clients real-time data-driven advice on what the cost of the build might be. We will then typically sit alongside a design team at every step of the way in all the meetings to provide an ongoing and very much proactive set of cost control procedures all the way through to make sure that once a budget for a scheme has been set, that is actually not exceeded, and where it is exceeded, there's very good reason for it. So our role then covers all the way through the cost control process into procurement, which Ollie's touched on earlier on, which includes tender processing, analysis, recommendation, and all the way through to arranging contracts and on-site monitoring, which would be payment procedures, analysis of any changes to the contract, if it's fixed price lump sum, what that means in terms of cost analysis, and ultimately agreeing final accounts with contractors before people shake hands and go their separate ways. QSs, or cost managers who work for contractors or in the supply chain, do a slightly different role, even though they're called the same thing. So whilst the principles are very similar, actually in practical terms, it's a very, very, very different day-to-day job, in the sense that they're often involved much later in the process, such that a contract is already in place with the client before contractors' QSs come into play, subject to how things are procured. They might be involved in monitoring design development changes resulting in variations to the contract baseline, but actually for very different reasons, because their job is to protect their own profitability and their own contracts that they have with their supply chain. So they'll be involved in organising the division of a project into a number of different component work packages, and actually awarding individual contracts, which can be potentially up to 30, 35 different packages of work, depending on what the scheme is, and to the degree to which modern methods are adopted in the scheme, into some more specialised areas, and placing contracts on that basis. They then have to deal with the contractual and legal matters sort of on sort of much smaller bite-sized chunks, but 30 times over through the process. So a very, very different role. And ultimately their job is to make sure that the fixed prices that they've agreed with the client that end up in lump sum contracts or contracts of some description are not exceeded. And they will, of course, in the same ways that we will arrange payments on site for a main contract arrangement, they will do the same for all of their subcontractors. So whilst called the same thing, very, very different. Obviously, our focus at the moment, for the purposes of competition, is in the sort of more consultancy role, and we'll be talking through now on how we might go in a little bit more detail about understanding and analysing what some of your schemes might cost.
So I'm going to give you a really exciting talk now on cost planning structure, and how we go about producing.
These guys are lucky, Danny. They've got 3 QSs on the call tonight. I mean, it's like Christmas has come early.
We can't see their faces, so they might be asleep. But yeah. So but what we're going to do is just talk around how we typically come up with an order of cost estimate or a cost plan through the different stages, as been spoke about by Rob and Ollie and the other talkers. So hopefully you're all aware of the REBA plan of work 2020. I assume most of you are, and obviously this was updated last year. I think it was stage 3 that was predominantly changed, but I think one of the architects will probably confirm that. So what this just sets out is obviously the 7 stages within a design process. And what I've put below the line is really, this is not I wouldn't call it the RICS view. If you look at the NRM one, which I'll go on to in a bit later, they've got a slightly different approach, and because it was produced back in 2012, they're still referencing the old stages, which you probably will never recognise or never have to talk about again. So what this does is just outlines different stages where we typically would undertake a order of cost estimate or cost plan. So currently, obviously, where you guys are at with the competition, you're going to be sort of working around this sort of concept design stage. So typically we would only ever carry out an order of cost estimate. So sometimes we can carry that order of cost estimate out very early on. So we can literally have a client with no design team who comes to us and goes, I want to build 100 houses on this plot of land. How much is it going to cost me? And we'll go away, look at our benchmark data, and form a view on what that costs. And typically that will sometimes set the budget, or at that point he'll then engage with a design team then to produce a sort of outline scheme design. And then at that stage again, we'll probably review and cost that to sort of baseline the budget. And then obviously if he's happy with that and he thinks he can you know, make a profit or the scheme's worth developing, then he normally appoints the team and on we go. So I've highlighted order of cost estimate because I think as part of your deliverables of the project, we're going to be asking you to produce a form of cost estimate that we'll touch on in a bit more detail. But I thought what I'd talk about is the other stages following an order of cost estimate. So typically, you know, the planning stage would be sort of at stage 2. So that's when your scheme will normally go into planning. And during sort of stages 2 and 3, we're probably still talking about optioneering on different types of structures, but once the scheme goes into planning, the look and feel the scheme or the project will be fixed, but we can still talk about what type of structure it's going to be, whether it's going to be a concrete frame, CLT, you know, we're going to go off-site, on-site, and all those nice discussions that we like to have. But we've always got to have that one eye on the budget and the outline brief at all times. Typically once we've, you know, typically at stage 2 or 3, we've decided, okay, we've all agreed on a route forward and we've got our planning consent, and then on we go with the design team. Then they go ahead and design the project in a lot more finer detail. But each stage, you know, the QS is there always with their waving their cost plan and making sure that the architects are not getting too creative without telling anyone, or the structural engineers are being too lazy and just putting in their software, and out comes a structure which, you know, is down to the QS to sort of challenge them where needed to make sure that we're getting the most efficient design and also cost that sits alongside that. And then typically procurement can take place at really any point in the process, but you know, really obviously we want to typically go into the contract stage will be sort of around stage 4 or 5, and then at that point in time, this is where the role of the consultancy QS will go into a monitoring role, and then the contractors QS with who works for the main contractor will go away and then procure typically the individual packages. So that was just a bit of an overview of the sort of the phases of cost planning, but I think for us we're sort of more concentrating in this order of cost estimate here. So this is where it gets really exciting. So the RSCS guidance of the NRM 1, 2 and 3, and this really gives the industry consistent approach to how we structure sort of cost plans and cost estimates, and sets out rules of how we should approach it for each individual element. So the NRM 1 really talks about the structure and the rules, and the NRM 2 really goes into the finer detail of how you would measure a timber building, for instance, to the nth degree. And that typically doesn't really, you know, take place until the later design stages. I must admit, NRM 3 I've never opened in my life, and that's more looking at how we cost and estimate maintenance work. So, you know, hopefully none of you will have to ever do that in your life, because I can imagine it's not very exciting. Okay, so what we're showing here is the typical structure of a cost plan, and I think Ollie showed it in his slide earlier, and I think this is probably quite an important slide to sort of review and understand. So this is the breakdown we typically would see a cost estimate broken down into, which is you have your group elements, which are 1 to 8, which is the building works, and this is any costs associated with actually direct cost of putting the building up. And then we've got the groups 9 to 14, which we call the sort of indirect or on costs, which are typically your main contractors preliminaries, which are you know, the management required to build your house or any project, alongside with all of the plant things like tower cranes, scaffolding, you know, your site setup and welfare, all those things that sit in your preliminaries. And then the sort of the 10 to 14 are the costs of obviously the overheads and profits. Obviously we need to be paid at some point, so you have your project and design fees, architects fees, other development and project costs. Then typically you'd have a risk allowance and also an inflation allowance. So, you know, some projects we work on, you know, can go on for 3 years, or we could speak to a client 2 years ago, you know, we still not got it through planning. So we do have to take in consideration inflation, because depending on the size of the project, it can be a long time before that initial first cost estimate till you're actually building that, putting that first spade in the ground. And here's just an example that you know, is taken from the NRM for how a sort of a cost estimate summary page would typically look. You know, the likes of the consultancies like us and G&T will probably get a bit more creative than that in our approach and how we summarise cost plans and cost estimates. So in the NRM, there is, I'll go back to, in NRM 1, there is a lot of rules. So there's a lot of pages for each specific group element, sub-element and components, and it gives you a typical rules for how we should structure the cost plan, and then it goes into the detail of what it should be included and excluded in that particular sub-element. So your group element is your 9 or your 14 groups here, and within those group elements you'll have the group elements, you will have an element. So that would be your frame and upper floors, you know, substructure. It will go down to your roof, stairs. So it's broken down, and there's a clear defined structure in place that the NRM that typically most cost consultants will follow. So in here as well, then it breaks it down into your sub elements. So your superstructure will need a frame. So your frame is your element, and then that frame could be a various typology of a number of sub-elements or one sub-element. So I've highlighted timber frames here because obviously there's a lot of timber talk. And then what will happen then, you go into your level 4 component, and then you further detail exactly each component of that timber frame. An example of this, sorry, it's a bit blurred. Well, this is an extract from the NRM. So as you can see here is your sub-element here, component, and then what it does, it gives you the unit it should be measured in, alongside a number of measurement rules, and what should be included in and excluded in that particular element. So, you know, it's quite important when you're doing cost planning that there is a consistent approach across the industry. Everybody is following these guidance. No, not everybody follows it to the nth degree, but you know, it's always a good reference point, and it's typically is followed. So Rob, do you want to talk about data sources?
Yeah, I think we just wanted to cover a little bit. I mean, obviously we're at an advantage. We do this stuff day in, day out. We have rafts of empirical data at our disposal where we understand the cost of things. But for you guys, it must be a little bit more challenging. We touched on it earlier in one of the earlier presentations. There's a number of different areas where you can source data. BCAS being one, pricing books like SPONS being another. As cost consultants, one of the things that we have to do very often, we have to be very close to the market, and the market's changing all the time. You know, right now, as you can probably imagine, the volatility that's out there for a number of very obvious reasons means that if we haven't got our finger on the pulse and haven't got an absolute understanding of what sort of to some degree macroeconomics is doing, such that it's going to affect material and labour pricing, and how does that translate into subcontract and main contract prices, then we're going to be giving our clients pretty duff advice. However, for people like you who are perhaps not familiar with that, these are good sources of information, and I support Ollie's statement earlier on as well, that manufacturers are also really great sources of pricing information and help you to think about how you might start to think about the building up of pricing for your particular element of your project. The one thing, and I have put a bit of a note of caution there, some of the cost data that is published on BCIS is a fantastic guide, but is often unratified, and can and if not understood correctly, can be slightly wild. So important to take a number of different data sources to try and draw some conclusions around. I think what Danny's given you there is an overview of the new rules of measurement, in the sense that as part of the sort of the judging criteria, if you like, it's really looking at the logic of how you go about thinking about things in order to come up with an answer.
Yeah, so we've been having some discussions with Tabitha, and I think the scoring is around 20% on cost, which in real life terms, if we were to score a tender return, usually commercial is around 70% and the technical's 30%. So yeah, I feel a bit unjust there, but no, appreciate it. This is a design competition and not a QS competition. So what we have decided with Tabitha is that we are going to issue you a template for a cost estimate, so to follow with some guidance. So hopefully it's not going to be too daunting for yourselves to do. So this is an example. We'll give you a worked example as well. So hopefully that should provide you a bit of guidance. We don't want to give you too much. Obviously, we do want you to go out and do some due diligence on that. But like Rob said, we are looking for effort rather than accuracy on the actual the actual costs. So Rob, you're going to talk about some cost drivers here.
Yeah. So I mean, what it can be. What we don't want to do is get you all disappearing down rabbit holes. And what we sort of find, and how we advise our clients, actually, particularly early stages, is actually that 90% or so of cost in a residential asset can actually be boiled down to very, very few packages of work. And actually, the greater level of focus on 6 to 7 packages or so means that chances are you're going to set the framework in a much more accurate fashion early, rather than get too bogged down at too early stages on particular levels of carpet finish or particular costs of paint finishes in your scheme. So what we just wanted to articulate here was, actually, when you're thinking about your cost estimating as part of your design solution, try and focus on the big ticket items, because that will deliver you a sort of more logical and accurate outturn than perhaps getting too bogged down in some of the detail early on. So things like the substructure and frame, the envelope, the servicing, and some of the fixtures and fittings like kitchens and bathrooms are some of when the major building costs are. And then management and logistics is something that perhaps sometimes gets overlooked, but actually can contribute hugely to the overall cost of a scheme. And obviously, if you're looking at something that's you're trying to get really efficient, the more deliverable in terms of speed and efficiency on site, then the much more cost effective your scheme is going to be. I can hear my son screaming back downstairs. Just a flash here of some very typical benchmarks for house building costs. They can vary quite dramatically depending on how they're actually delivered, whether they're delivered via a house builder directly or delivered via a third-party main contractor. So can end up with very, very different outturns depending on how they are. At the lower end of the range, house builders can deliver these things for somewhere between £90 and £120 a foot, depending on specification, depending on size and scale. Whereas whereas third-party main contractors are delivering slightly different because of the way it's set up, and they're delivering slightly more, somewhere around 100 to 140 pounds, something like that. A quick touch on value, really important, because actually as residential QSs, we need to have an understanding of value, because the success of the scheme will actually depend on the relationship between the two. And in simplistic terms, if you don't spend enough on your project in terms of specification, what you're going to end up doing is limiting your ability to sell, reducing your absorption rates, i.e. the rate at which you can sell assets or rent assets, and actually you end up decreasing the success of the scheme, and often actually get pressure from planning and sort of the design critique, if you like, which actually is aspiring to much greater quality levels. The other end of the scale, you spend too much and you're going to breach what we call capital values, and effectively you're going to devalue your scheme. So you need to make sure that there is an optimized relationship, if you like, between development value and build cost, such that the overall success, there is an overall success in what you're trying to do.
I can take the categories, Rob, and do you want to do the next? You can take the next slide. So yeah. So you know, being from Cast, and obviously want to sort of help drive positive change in the industry, we are going to talk about modern methods of construction and different types. So I'm not sure if you're all aware, but there is a definition framework which has been adopted now by the government, which Cast helped write, and it's just categorizing the different types of MMC available within the industry into seven categories. So it's quite an easy document to read. It's probably worth, we'll send you a link, or just Googling it, it should come up. And really it's just categorizing the different types of MMC. So from category 1, you're looking at the 3D primary system. So this is your full sort of volumetric off-site construction. Category 2 is looking at the 2D primary structural systems. So this is looking at things like light gauge steel frames, CLT frames, you know, that are different to you know, the 3D side of things. Then we've got category 3, which is more componentized systems. So this is looking at panelized systems. Category 4, obviously there's been a lot of talk around this, but whether it comes actually into real life, and I suppose some of the guys on the talk may have some more experience in this, but this is more looking at 3D printing and you know, additive mixed structures, which I know they're doing quite a bit out in the Middle East, but I don't think it's really touched the shores of the UK yet. But you know, hopefully we will see that. Category 5 is looking at more non-structural assemblies and sub-assemblies. So this is looking at bathroom pods, utility cupboards, you know, prefab kitchens that will come in a pod and delivered to site, fully completed and you know, built in a factory. Then there's your category 6, which is more traditional building project. You know, so this is like technology to help you know, help on-site activity to be more efficient. So you know, there's things like exoskeletons, there's like systems like the brick slip system you can see on the screen, and also systems that help to lay bricks faster. And then the category 7 is more looking around productivity and software and site processes to enhance construction projects and make them more efficient.
Kelly, just reflecting on the question at the beginning of the session on why isn't everyone doing it. There's a variety of reasons, but actually one of the ones that we find in our experience that people don't adopt more of it is actually one of familiarity. So a lot of clients we speak to are so wedded to particular site processes and particular design processes that they've done for many, many years. The thought of actually doing something different in a factory is perceived to be so alien to them, they're almost scared of actually adopting it and delivering it on site. One of the reasons the MHCLG went away and came up with a categorization of different modern methods was because there was such a plethora of language that was being used to describe what is ultimately the same thing. People became very, very confused by it and didn't actually understand what it was they were trying to do. So of course, in a world where people are already familiar with what they want to do and the confusing language, it just meant the barriers became greater and greater. So what the categorization is there to do is to actually try and increase people's familiarization and understanding of it, so people don't just jump to volumetric boxes when we talk about MMC. There's actually a lot of different technologies out there that can add to the pre-manufactured value of various schemes and actually deliver various benefits in many different forms. So you know, there's cost and procurement nuancing that goes with that we don't have time to cover today. But one of the major issues that we find is simply one of we're creatures of habit. Many clients are creatures of habit, and the thought of doing something in not doing something in sort of sloppy concrete and brick and block work is actually quite daunting to a lot of people. We dropped this slide on here because thought it was important just to reflect in some of your responses as you start to think about the timber technologies and the different types of systems or solutions you may come up with. One of the things that we are one of the areas that we're constantly advising our clients on in the early stages is if you've got a particular type of solution in mind in respect of a modern methods approach to delivery, some of these have to be thought about almost from day dot. So, if for instance you're looking at a solution in some of your designs which might adopt a three-dimensional approach to delivery, category 1, then actually that's something you need to be thinking about in your design from almost the word go, because the further you get down the track through your design, the harder and harder it is to reverse out of what could be perceived as a traditionally designed project and into a more modernized solution that's going to be delivered in a factory. Now, that's not to be said for every type, because some you've got a much more flexibility, and you've got a period of time in the run-up to decision making, but certainly some of those structural systems in the category 1s and the sort of panelized systems that we talked about earlier as well, you know, we really need to be thinking about them early, engaging with manufacturers and understanding what and how they're going to be developed so that we don't miss the boat.
Okay, so we just put a next steps on here. So just obviously we just putting on some key resources there for when you're undertaking your cost estimate. And I think again Ollie touched on some of these earlier, but the NRM is going to be probably an important one just to sort of gain a bit of understanding of the structure. And when you look at it, is quite a daunting document. But I think if you start just to understand and look at the more focus on the rules for each element, it's quite quickly to get a grasp of it. Obviously we'll issue our cost estimate template to help as a guide. You know, it's purely there for a guide, and if you want to go off and carry out your own cost estimate, we're more than happy with that. Obviously we touched on SPONS, BCIS, and again I think, you know, we've all spoke about speaking to the market. There are some nice people out there, so they will respond to your requests. So, you know, and I think what we're probably looking for is you to articulate who you've spoken to and where you're getting your costing data from. And also I think we're going to set up a drop-in surgery. I don't know if it'd be fortnightly or weekly through the process. So myself and Rob will be there to sort of answer any questions you have. And just a little bit there of I think I've covered most of this anyway. So this is just again outlining the sort of the deliverables, what we've touched on. And again, you know, we are looking for A for effort. So, you know, we're not looking for pinpoint accuracy. We just want to see, you know, the logic and the approach you've when producing your cost estimate, and obviously where you're getting your data from. And that's what we're going to be looking at in relation to the scoring. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, guys. That was great. I think there's a lot of information there for everyone to take
Yeah.
in. Great, thank you. And really useful tools as well, and advice. I think I just want to point out on Modern Methods Construction, our partner from MOBIE, Mark Southgate, has been putting some really good resources and responses in the chat as well, so check that out. And I do, before we move on to our next speaker, Dr. Gemma, who's talking about placemaking, I just want to ask a quick QS question to our speakers, if possible. So this is about carbon, and we're thinking about sustainability generally, and low carbon development here as part of the brief. So we normally talk about a triangle between cost, quality and speed. So the question is, should carbon make that into a square? And as you know, the master quantifiers, should the QS be accounting for the embodied carbon of designs, offering carbon emissions projections and financial data to maybe change the way we procure things, and somehow change the system? I don't know what if
yeah,
that's too big a question.
Yeah, it's quite a big question, and it's definitely and it's definitely one that we've definitely seen more questions being asked about. It's one, I'm not going to lie, it's, you know, and I'm not sure if Ollie's got any further experience in that, but it's something that we've been speaking to a number of other consultants who are developing tools around to try and work out the embodied carbon. But to quantify and cost that is quite a challenge, and it's something that I've got not that much experience in at the moment. But you know, I do believe in the next sort of 5 years that's definitely going to be more and more talked about, and it's probably another sort of a string to the bow we're going to have to develop over the next 5 years as a skill set.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, Kelly, I like that. That's quite a cool idea, that it's a square rather than a triangle. I've never actually heard that before, so yeah. I don't know if you invented that, but that's quite cool. But
I can't take. It was Sam actually from ACAN who suggested this. I can't take credit.
I completely agree with what Danny's saying. I mean, I think you know, there's lots of people out there doing it. I think probably the most important thing is whether we do it as, you know, Rob said we hate being called quantity surveyors, but we are, measurement is what we do. Whether we do it or someone else does it, I think the most important thing is that there's a consistent method that everybody uses and everyone buys into, that is as accurate as possible. Because again, there seems to be people that take a different view on embodied carbon or sequestered carbon or life cycle analysis and all that stuff. If we could just get a party line, and you know, I'm sure that it would be a service that CAST could offer, and maybe we could offer. You know, I'm sure we could adapt to it. I think you just give us a method of measurement, and we'll crack on with it. Really, whether it's us or whoever.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that as well. There's a lot out there at the moment, so yeah, I'm sure we'll get there in the end. I think there's a lot of industry, you know, movement towards it. And we've just had a new question in here from Orson. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that correct. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How do you quantify the added value of exposed timber on health and well-being? And how do you mitigate against market commodity volatility, current steel, cement and timber prices? I suppose the second one's more for the QSs, maybe the first one's more for Alex.
So how do you quantify? Well, all of those studies I mentioned were analysing data and getting feedback. So and the feedback was, if you're in a timber environment, you felt better, you were more productive. That was quantified. In fact, they were producing more. So it's the proof's in the pudding, in a sense. And I think I know I particularly will always feel much more calm and relaxed and happy if I'm in a timber building than over a steel or a concrete building. And I can't put my finger on why, but it just because it's a natural product perhaps, and you've got the smell and the sense, the acoustic, all of that. So I think it's just sort of more gut as well as there is there is
more and more in a kind of commercial environment, that, you know, rental prices go up and the value of the asset goes up when you have a low carbon and a healthy and biophilic building. So I think that there are ways that it's changing, but yeah, there's not an actual measurement for that at the moment, as far as I'm aware. Yeah, I'm not sure about market volatility. Yeah.
Okay, what was this? So let me read that question again, this second part of it.
From my point of view, I mean, on the quantify and the added value, there is various pieces of research. There's something that's come out of Canada, I've been told, that suggests that they can prove that, you know, on a study they've done, that it's better for people's wellness. But again, you know, that's up to, I guess, interpretation. But what I would say is just going back to what Danny was saying earlier, and I think, you know, obviously different cost consultancies will try and predict the future. It's a very difficult thing to do. I don't think anyone is able to do that really. But you know, it's again reaching out to the supply chain. You know, I mean, we were talking to William Hare and Severs last week or a couple of weeks back, and they were telling us that, you know, just the material price has gone up, you know, something in the order of 150, 165 pound a ton for structural steel because of various kind of market conditions. And my understanding is that timber is due to have a bit of a hike as well. So all you can really do is go out there and ring these relationships is the key, and get them to try and tell you, really.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's just, you know, keeping your ear to the ground and speaking to the suppliers who do give you a lot of insight, because obviously they want to make sure they're giving you as much notice as possible when these hikes are coming in prices. And I know there is a problem with steel at the moment throughout the industry on the supply of that.
Great, thanks so much, both of you, and Alex as well. Dr. Gemma, Jerome, are you going to take the helm now and tell us about placemaking? Exciting.
I will try to, Kelly. Hello, everyone. Good evening. I really enjoyed the previous presentations. As a planner, I learned a lot from learning from my colleagues from the discipline. So yeah, really great to be here. So yeah, as Kelly said, I'm going to kind of change the pace slightly and switch the focus to something a little bit less measurable than we've heard about previously, but nonetheless going to talk to you about a methodology that we've developed where we're trying to measure quality. So as Kelly said, this section's about placemaking. I just added a quick extra slide to actually help with that. Let me just get my slides up on the screen for you now, and hopefully we'll be good to go. Okay, so I'm Dr. Gemma Jerome, and I'm the Director of Building and Nature, which is a new benchmark for green infrastructure. It's a UK-wide initiative, and so tonight I'm going to tell you about what it is, how we developed it, who's using it, and what the benefits of having a standardized approach to green infrastructure are. So green infrastructure, for those on the call who maybe this is a new area of thinking, it's everything around the building. So we've heard a lot tonight about what you really need to consider and focus in when you are designing, implementing, constructing and managing, maintaining the buildings in your design brief. But what we're thinking about here is, what about everything that's going on around the building? So that's the essential infrastructure, and increasingly we're starting to think of that as public health infrastructure, but in planning terms we talk about that as green infrastructure. And in terms of this being an approach which can contribute to your placemaking, this is a quick definition I grabbed just in the background there, just to kind of touch on some of this holistic design principle which underpins placemaking. So we're talking about a multifaceted approach. We're talking about the whole life cycle of a development, so from the planning and even at the site allocation stage, but certainly planning, design, and then going through to long-term management and maintenance of spaces, public spaces, but it might, in green infrastructure terms, it's also the private spaces in a development which have a green infrastructure function. We're talking about community. So what are the assets, the strengths and needs of a community? How do we develop a community's potential through placemaking, and creating spaces that really promote, support, enhance people's health, well-being and happiness? So how do we encourage and support people to survive and thrive through our approach to placemaking? So That's a bit of context. In terms of Building with Nature then, Building with Nature has filled a gap where we didn't have a clear definition for industry in terms of quality around green infrastructure. So we've set the standard, we've created a national benchmark. So when we talk about high quality green infrastructure and really securing all of the benefits associated with green infrastructure, we've done that. So we've created a definition of green infrastructure through a framework of standards. The standards we've developed are free to use, and they are being used by both planners and developers, so and everybody who supports developers and house builders to bring forward development. So it's really about securing the benefits of green infrastructure for people, places and communities. In terms of who's using our standards, the standards themselves are being supported, and we have a standards board. So we talk about this board as our guardians of the standard. So just a flavour here of this is something that at national government level, we're getting support to drive this as the standard industry should be using as their benchmark, and we're being advised, guided and supported by a whole range of experts from the green infrastructure field, representatives from industry and government, and this is a UK-wide approach as well. So there might be nuances and differences at each of the devolved nation levels, at each of the local levels, at a district level, but what we're talking about here is driving a kind of line through that, raising the baseline so all developers and house builders better understand what we mean when we talk about quality with regards to green infrastructure. That's essentially what Building with Nature is. It's a definition of quality. We were able to make a definition of quality by drawing on existing good practice guidance, because one of the things we found in the early stages of developing Building with Nature is there might be good policy in place, but there is sometimes a lag in that actually being that quality being seen on the ground in terms of delivery and at the construction stage, and definitely the long-term management and maintenance stage, because quality falls through the gaps, because green infrastructure is a multidisciplinary approach. There are so many different people involved at the design stage and then construction and the long-term management and maintenance stages, that it can often be, if it's everybody's responsibility, it's no one's responsibility. So we've designed a set of standards which can be used by all of those sector specialists at each stage of the planning and development process. So what we're interested in with Building with Nature is the whole life cycle of green infrastructure, from the early stages of design, and a key part of this is building in your thinking around high quality at the earliest possible stage, so you don't get into a situation where it's value engineered out, so there isn't that pushback around financial viability. If you're working with nature and building nature into your development, then it should actually make your life easier. It's about making nature work harder and smarter to solve some of those infrastructure issues, which you might otherwise just take a civil engineer approach to. Actually, if we're working with nature, we can look at some of these key issues around environmental quality and bringing benefits through for people and wildlife. So it's a benchmark for industry. We've got a set of quality standards, and we want to think about these standards as holistic design principles. We're doing it. Well, over 50 schemes are now using Building with Nature. We've got more and more coming down through the pipeline. What that represents, more than 20,000 homes which have been secured with the co-benefits of high quality green infrastructure. The standards from the beginning have been developed in partnership with industry. So this isn't something that's been developed in a lab and now we're trialing it. All the way through from the beginning, we've been testing these standards. So we're confident that they do make the difference in terms of delivering quality. And as I've mentioned already, this is a placemaking approach. So it's building in quality. So development is bringing forward benefits for people and wildlife. So how does good quality green infrastructure help to deliver better development? And there's some really key messages here, which I imagine everybody in the call can quickly coalesce around. We've got a situation of emergency. We've got a climate emergency, which, you know, every single local authority I speak to day in, day out that's the thing that they have set targets around. They've declared a climate emergency. That's one thing to do that at a corporate kind of strategic level. What does that mean on the ground? What actually we asking developers and house builders to do differently? So as we've heard about some of these concepts already tonight, when we talk about climate, we're talking about mitigation, yes, and that's about reducing the impact of carbon in the atmosphere, and that might be we might want to demonstrate that through particular approaches to design. That might be about including green infrastructure to help with urban cooling. It might be about selecting different kinds of plant species to help sequester carbon, but it's also adaptation. So we're going to have to think about how we adapt our built and natural environment to respond to the carbon that's already in the atmosphere and that's already creating quite difficult climatic conditions. So thinking about sustainable drainage systems to help with flood resilience, because there is increasing levels of surface water that we need to manage. We need our landscapes to be able to hold water better and then get benefits for amenity and biodiversity on the back of that. We need to be thinking about climate positive behaviors as well. How do we actually encourage people to be using less carbon and to be enjoying their environments more as a result? So an example of that is how we're encouraging people to move around without fossil fuels. So active travel routes, green infrastructure, the evidence showing us that people prefer to walk and cycle in and around areas that have tree-lined streets are much more attractive and beneficial for people to be enjoying their time outdoors. Equally, if we're talking about cycling, then the evidence is there that people prefer to cycle along green routes. So it's using the evidence that we've got and bringing that forward in our design decisions. The second emergency we're facing is the ecological emergency. We've had a catastrophic and consistent collapse in biodiversity over recent decades, and some of our metric-based approaches have not solved that issue. So what we're trying to do with Building with Nature is add another layer to that. If it's not just about X number of hectares of this type of green infrastructure and creating more habitats, it's actually making sure those habitats are effective and functional and are actually making space for nature. So we need to be thinking about the landscape scale connectivity. So where does the development sit in the nature recovery network? And that's something you can research and look into. What's the understanding in the area for this development as to can it be a stepping stone, creating new habitat within the red line boundary of the development, and that actually becomes a stepping stone for the wider network. Look at the Lawton principles, and that's where we're kind of taking our steer from, that we need to make more, bigger, better and more joined up space for nature. And then enhancing biodiversity. It's quickly coming down the line. The Environment Bill is making biodiversity net gain on all new development with a minimum margin of 10%. That's now going to be a planning requirement. So we need to get ready for this. We need to make our developments ready to be not just policy compliant, but ideally moving beyond policy and enhancing biodiversity, not just for the benefit of wildlife, but actually making sure there's benefits for people in there too. And then the third emergency, the health emergency. I think the last 12 months, there's no argument here now around the fact that we have a stark realization that people do not have equal access to high quality green space. And depending where you live, nature on your doorstep is a reality or it's not. And that then has profound impacts on people's health and social inequality. So we need our development to be taking that on board and making accessible high quality green space for everyone, because actually that nature on your doorstep is what has the biggest impact on your physical health and mental health. So building that into development design briefs is really, really key if we're serious about creating outcomes for people through the development planning process. And then the fourth angle on this is that this is really key to the economy as well. This isn't a nice to have infrastructure. This is key infrastructure. If we can work with nature, it's a cost-effective way of building in nature-based solutions to the places that we're creating, that we're valuing natural capital, that we recognise that nature delivers ecosystem services, which in turn supports our way of life. So quality placemaking is a key part of that story. How have we done that then? How can Builder with Nature help you? We've got a set of standards. Now, we tried to make this as easy for people to understand, as wide a stakeholder group of people to understand as possible. So we talk about these 3 Ws. When it comes to high quality placemaking as an approach to development, think about well-being, think about water, think about wildlife. There are key ingredients to high quality places. That means something to your end user as well. So if you're trying to tell the story of why our development is good, we've created the standards around these themes to do just that. So we recognize that the standards themselves are underpinned by technical and robust evidence. However, a key part of development is recognizing that end point of marketing and selling your design. So how are you going to tell the story of why this is a good development? And this is the way to do this. The standards themselves, then we have a set across these 4 themes, and together these are the components of high quality green infrastructure as a placemaking approach. So we're making sure we're delivering multifunctional and connected spaces, and not just green and open spaces which only perform one function, but actually making sure those spaces, it's not only a play space, but it's also adding to your biodiversity, and it's helping with your carbon levels within the site, and also potentially has a sustainable drainage function as well. That makes sense, because then it's not about land take, because the biggest pushback from industry is we can't do all of this, we can't find 40% extra more land just to deliver green infrastructure. You don't need to. The land that you've got can be working harder and smarter for you. And then there's the benefits around people and wildlife, and then also the key role of managing surface water as well. So that's the framework of the standards. And if people are interested, then go along to our website and look at more detail around the standards, and even download our standards framework. That's perfectly valid. I'm just doing a high level view today. So I will move on to a case study. So this is just to bring to life a bit for you, what does it actually mean to apply the standards to a development? So this is a case study from the last couple of years that has been. This scheme actually is now, the planning permission has been granted. They have a Builder in Nature accreditation in place. And it's a very interesting example because it's a regeneration scheme, and I think there will be some read across in terms of your consideration of design for Riverside, Sunderland as well. So this is Barn Barton. The scheme has been brought forward by a mix of professions from the design team, but the slides here today you're seeing from the landscape architect team who are driving the green infrastructure. But just a little bit of context, it's an existing development that's being redeveloped, and the nature of the scheme is that there's a lot of challenges around the site in terms of access to nature, in terms of the quality of the existing built features. So you can kind of pour over these slides later. I'm just going to whistle through them at the moment, but you can see here, this is a photo from the site, the existing residential units. They're badly in need of regeneration. People are living in houses that are damp. It's not fit for purpose for a kind of happy habitation anymore. And the site also has some other kind of constraints around the fact it's on a slope. There's a lot of kind of factors around wind, and the conditions are challenging. The site itself has, at the micro scale, at the detail scale rather, we've got concerns from the community in terms of they feel like they're losing their homes, and it's about recognizing that community engagement role of the design team as well. How do you bring people with you along on a journey? Even though we might look at this as professionals and say, well, that green infrastructure, it's not multifunctional, it's not high quality, let's just get rid of it. The fact is, people have lived here, and for some people they've lived here for generations. That's the situation they're living in. How do you tell the story so you're actually bringing people along with you on that journey? And that's a really key part of the design team as well. And, you know, are these spaces being used well? At the moment, they're not, but people still are attached to that sense of space. So you need to factor all of this in when you're designing, and whether for an existing community or a new community. There is a clear constraint at the moment about lack of nature. A lot of the green spaces is just amenity grassland that's managed. so that means there is a lot of opportunities. There's a really big potential here to link this site to the wider nature recovery network. So what do I mean by that? We have the Tamar Estuary just down the road. There's some fantastic vistas and opportunities for linking the landscape scale in with the site scale. And so the approach that this design team took, building in the thinking around the Building with Nature standards, is to make a more connected scheme using green infrastructure as those key linkages between the buildings. So in terms of Building with Nature, there was a chance to put more emphasis on green infrastructure in and around where people live, but make those spaces really high quality, make them attractive, and make them multifunctional, so people can see them both as private and public space. There, you know, there's opportunities for social gathering, there's opportunities for active lifestyles, thinking about how people move across the site, key issues around permeability, key, you know, both for people but also for wildlife. So factoring all of this in and layering this up as you're bringing forward your design decisions. Water, there's an opportunity here to make sure you take as much advantage as you can from the surface area you've got to slow down the passage of water on a sloping site, hold the water in the landscape through features like rain gardens, and then from a wildlife point of view, are you maximizing the opportunity for new biodiversity features, but also excuse me, thinking about the mitigation hierarchy as well, so retaining features that are on site where possible and then using them as your kind of palette for introducing new features. And there's a nice snapshot of the scheme that was permitted in planning, and I think you'll agree that certainly in principle this is looking to be a much higher quality scheme than we have currently. And to give you a flavour of what that means in terms of that site having accreditation, as this site is still at planning stage, it has a design accreditation. So the design accreditation for Building with Nature has been designed to recognise that a scheme is on track to delivering high quality green infrastructure. However, at a later stage, at full planning, we push our applicants through to full accreditation. So there's two possible outcomes, good and excellent, and that's where we can start to see the detail. So what's your species selection? How is your green infrastructure being delivered in terms of orientation and connectivity between the features? Just to remind, I've got 5 minutes to go. And then once you have a full accreditation in place for a development, the key thing with Building with Nature, and this is really, really important because the feedback from industry when we're developing this is with other tools like BREEAM, it's great, they're master planning tools, but it doesn't have a post-construction check. So with Building with Nature, we have a post-construction check. That means you can have an accreditation in place which helps you sell that development, but you don't get your award signed off until we can come back and see that you've done what you said you've done. That has obvious benefits for the planning authority too. So the local authority, some local authorities are starting to require Building with Nature accreditation on certain sites that are particularly sensitive or where the potential for people or wildlife is particularly high, and they like that element of having a post-construction check, because let's face it, the enforcement potential of a lot of local authorities is very low now. So this acts as an external verification and an additional mechanism to really securing quality. The final stage of the accreditation process is the Building with Nature National Award, and we deliver those in partnership with the Landscape Institute. We just had our first awards last November, and it was really great to see the schemes being brought forward. So the schemes that have been signed off and are in use, really starting to spotlight best practice. Who's the benchmark for? Just a reminder that we're really trying to triangulate the needs and demands of each of the key stakeholder groups. So this can really help developers tell the story of good development. It can help planners plan for better outcomes. So the standards are also being used to raise the bar in policy terms, to set out the stall at the earliest possible stage as to what planning authorities are looking for from development. But it also helps that that other stakeholder group, the end user, whether that's individuals who maybe would otherwise object to a development, they can, you know, we can start to turn that objection around and say, well, instead of just objecting to a development, how about we say what we want from that development? Let's actually define what we're looking for. If that site's been allocated for development, let's get on board as a positive and proactive voice in that. So helping communities to better understand the planning process and contribute to. In terms of the benefits for the developer in particular, this is the feedback from our front runners, so people who have been using the Builder in Nature approach so far. Key message here is, if you have a shared framework of standards at an early stage in the application process, if the design team are really clear about what they need to be building into their design, that can help reduce planning uncertainty. So that can help to mitigate the cost burden on the developer of adding these additional features, of actually delivering high quality green infrastructure. So instead of that pushback of, well, I can't afford to do this, it's like, if you know you have to do this, you're building it into your budgets from the beginning. And in turn, it gives you a really clear way to say back to the planning authority, we have done this and it meets your local plan objectives. So that's what we mean by reducing planning uncertainty. It can help us smooth the passage through planning for both sides to get over those kind of arbitrary negotiations. A lot of the time, the reason planning applications take so long to come through is that back and forth between the applicant and the planning officers. So let's try and head that off at the pass. Let's have some really clear guidance that can follow an application through. That way we can better help to secure benefits for people and wildlife. And actually, a key thing with Builder in Nature is its practical how-to ideas of these big ideas around the climate and ecological emergencies. What does that look like in terms of change practice on the ground? So we've got a user guide which has a whole host of illustrative examples about what we mean to underpin the standards as well. Just to end on a couple of key messages, that yes, we are facing a climate emergency, and yes, we need as much help as possible in terms of climate tools. Some great feedback from the Royal Town Planning Institute about Builder in Nature, that currently it's the only tool out there which really does look at every aspect of the climate emergency, so adaptation, mitigation, climate justice, plan making and development management. We have thought about all of those different stages and aspects. So really great feedback there. And this is a bit of a sneak peek, guys, and we're in the process of redrafting the standards, simplifying. We're now at the stage of having used the standards for 3 years. We're ready for a reboot. And this is some of the draft wording that I wanted to add this in to reflect back some of the messaging you've been getting from the other speakers. We're really clear and conscious that where industry is going is zero carbon, and it's low carbon approaches to design, construction, long-term maintenance, and we're reflecting that back in the standards. So making sure the messages are on point and are the same from both policy side and from what's practical to expect from industry. And then also environmental impacts. We are aware of how much green infrastructure can impact positively on the quality of air, soil and water, and how sometimes, especially things like soil, that's forgotten. So it's not just above the ground, it's actually thinking about everything that's below ground and how important that is in terms of us being able to adapt to a future which is more uncertain. And then thinking about the quality of light, the quality of noise, and how green infrastructure can help to maximise the quality of living in a space, and using green infrastructure features to help with that. And to finish, if I've got time, Kelly, I am going to attempt to just pop across to YouTube and show a video. This might not work, so apologies if it doesn't. Right. Can you see and can you hear that? Let me just, Kelly, can you see and hear that?
We can hear, but we can't see.
Oh no, I don't know. Okay, tell you what, guys, I'll pop the YouTube video, link to the YouTube video in the chat, and you can watch it afterwards, rather than take up time now.
Thanks so much, Gemma. And Tabitha, to answer your question, I'd already just pinged on the link to the website to my colleagues, so definitely going to be suggesting it. Thanks so much, Gemma. I don't know, does anyone have any questions? I think Mark's been putting some amazing information in the chat. I don't know if we can get your get some input from you, Mark. Hi, thank you.
Hi Kelly. Hi Gemma.
Oh.
So
Yeah, I should
just
have
some background.
Mark actually helped develop Builder in Nature. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, so I'm slightly biased on this, but yeah, so it's I just put in the post that I think one of the points Gemma made, actually good placemaking is really about understanding the communities that exist there now and ones which go there in the future, and that's human, but it's also wildlife communities as well. So if you think in that term, what's a good place for all of those, you can't go far wrong actually. Because in some ways it's quite simple. It's just lots of people don't play it. They just go with a grand plan, and and we've seen the housing regeneration sites going in and coming out with a great plan, which will, for what will be as housing, but the people who are existing in those places haven't been consulted and feel threatened immediately that it won't be housing for them. But it's about good. We all know it, but it's about good design. And there's quite a lot going on in government around net biodiversity gain, and that's going to be a requirement increasingly in planning as well. So it's going to become more familiar. So unbiased, but Building with Nature is in a great position to make people understand the standards and apply them.
Fantastic. We did have one question in the chat, and I'm not sure if we 100% answered. Is there a document with the targets so we can work towards it quantitatively? I don't know if we're looking for some sort of template or something. Wendy, is that what you like?
There's less targets, but I think it's sort of thinking of Gemma's, is covering all of those bases. So doing one of those things well doesn't hit the mark. You've got to think cleverly about how you cover all of those bases. So water, wildlife, well-being. It's thinking in a whole. So that's the challenge, and that's why it's so good when you can make it all happen, but it's quite challenging.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, Mark, and thanks, Wendy, for your questions.
Oh, Gemma, sorry, I think your microphone might have gone. You're very, very quiet.
I don't know how to fix that. Is that any better?
No, sorry. Okay, thank you. There is one more question here. I don't know, maybe Mark, we can get your opinion on this. Why has it taken, from James, why has it taken that long for industry to realise that low carbon or zero carbon building is the way to go?
So it's sort of the same. Good question. So there's people who've known this for a long time. So there's people who've been trying this and doing this for quite a while, but it's not the majority. And it sort of goes back to why it's not MMC and modular and off-site not being picked up. It's a very traditional conservative industry which does this the way it always has done. And actually housing within that is probably even more so. And to be fair, some of them, the volume house builders, are making loads of money doing what they're doing right now. It's just not as good as it could be. So there are people who are waking up to it. There are people making a difference. I have to say that government did introduce zero carbon requirements, and then other governments and administrations removed them again, which now we look at the where we are, we would have been much further ahead had we followed those. We'd have had zero carbon housing from 2014 if we'd followed the zero carbon standards, but we didn't. We pulled them away again. So it is disappointing is an understatement. It is a massive missed opportunity. It just makes our challenge bigger. But I think now, if you talk to people, they do know it, they do get it, they realise they've got to do it. They're desperate to understand how to do it. So hence, young people, the young designers coming through who understand this stuff, you're going to be worth your weight in gold, because you understand and you probably live and breathe it as well. So therefore, I think you'll have a massive impact in industry when you get in. It's just the sort of people we want to get into industry and shake up those who don't who don't get this.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like I think we've all had the next generation are just coming through and teaching us loads of lessons and like leading the way on how to go. And I think it's really inspiring to be an engineer right now. I'm sure it's any designer or any consultant in the construction industry, because it's everything's changing. We get to rethink the mold and make it, you know, something that is good for the future generations. And yeah, I think it's really exciting.
And I genuinely also think it's actually an age when interdisciplinary working is really kicking off as well. That the recognition that none of us can do this working in silos. We've got to work together. And that hasn't always been what we've done in the industry either, but that's really big. So it's a fantastic opportunity. It's a brilliant time to be coming in because there's so much opportunity to change things for the better. So yeah, I wish I was younger and rejoining.
And I think this competition is the perfect precursor for that in real life going forwards as well. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to be involved in. So yeah, is there any more questions? Have we got time for any more questions? What do you think, Tabitha? I'll let No, we're at the end. Here we go. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers today. It's been really interesting, really informative. And yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And as you said, thank you to our fantastic speakers tonight. So Kelly, Ollie, Alex, Rob, Danny, and Gemma. Every night just gets like so much more information. I join you, Mark. Yeah, I'm going to be reborn and start all over again. We couldn't bring this to you without our sponsors. So the Confederation of Timber Industries, Accoya, Rotoblas, the Timber Decking and Cladding Association, PEFC, the ASBP, Wood for Good, and BSW. And take you back to this is your site in Sunderland to help us develop. This is your area. And this is a different view of your site, an aerial view. And you can see all the contours of the land. And they're looking for a carbon neutral community. 100 homes on this site, but in detail, the 3-bedroom family home. And tomorrow night, we have Future Homes. So don't miss out. The link is in the chat. And then on Friday, come and join us just for a chat. And if you missed last night with all our engineers, that'll go up on YouTube on Sunday or Monday this coming weekend. And so this is the end of tonight's procurement, costing and placemaking. Future Homes tomorrow, open house on Friday. And this is week 4 of our webinar series that leads into the Riverside Sunderland University Design Challenge.